was impressed that so many people stayed on, like as many people joined and stayed on.
So let's talk about Bob frameworks. So visually intrepid amongst you have already perhaps noticed the three arrows in the image at the head of the presentation. I'll highlight it right here. There is this mythical deck that Bob created after he sold, I believe, his last company. I can just imagine Bob, furiously, like he sold the company. You're supposed to dip your toes in the sand, Corona in hand, and all of those things. And instead, he's clicking away at the PowerPoint presentation, laying out what he wishes he could have said when the company was being acquired. And it was brought down to its bare essentials, which is what I love about that framework. In his language, it was about three things. And, it's like, if you have no business acumen and this is all you know, you're probably going to do all right. And this is what you need to know. Like, I wish somebody grabbed me and sort of showed me this many, many years ago. What's funny about it is that he made it like 6 months after the sale. So when it was completely, unneeded. This rings a bell for me because after I sold Triber, that was my SaaS marketing startup. After I sold Triber, for months after that, I was working on the UX. That was our failure. Our failure at Triber was we got the timing perfect. We got the value proposition down pat pretty good. We managed to monetize the platform 3 weeks into its existence. We got a lot of things right. Our top of the funnel was strong. Our bottom of the funnel was hemorrhaging until we sort of got a handle on it. But UX is most definitely one of the sins of my past. And I've spent months on new Triber UX after the acquisition. There was no chance of sort of deploying it or using it. It was just for my own edification. And it was great because it's really when I learned to connect business model, business architecture to the pixels, and then proceeded to make a living doing exactly that for the next few years at a startup incubator in New York. And so I totally get this impulse to set the past right. And the most visually intrepid amongst you have seen the Bob framework that I want to show you already in the title slide, the state of cloud. If you looked very carefully, here it is highlighted. All right, so let's isolate this and talk about it. The line that goes from the lower left to the upper right, you can think of that, and the way Bob thought about it was increase sales. Makes sense, right? You want a sales to go up and to the left. The line that's going from the upper left to the lower right is decrease cost, right? Makes sense. Expense management, decrease cost. It's input output, money coming in, money going out. Those are the two lines. Like you get those two lines right, and you're good. And the third line that runs through them is, we can think of it as a narrative line. It's the story that we tell about these things. And the way Bob phrased it in his deck, he called it the brand. And I'll digress and get deeper into this for just a moment because I think it's kind of important. And the way he calculated the value of a business was to use the two lines and throw away the third. And as you can imagine, the two lines that he used were cost and sales. If those two numbers make sense, um, then brand is gravy. It's, icing on the cake. Um, and so I regard these three lines as two that are tangible. You know how much you're paying every month to run the business. You know how much a cash flow you have. So that's the sales and cost. And then the brand is the intangible one. And so if we were to stop right here and say, oh, this applies to just Bob's business, or this applies to just sales and cost and brand, we wouldn't get the full value out of this. Every business unit every individual, in fact, can use this framework to sort of understand where they are in that space. If you think about someone like Bob, someone like, Dino, Bob has 2,000 employees under his wing. Dino has 3 team members and another 10 that are working on cloud, and apparently over 20 that are spending some amount of time on cloud. And I suspect this is where I stopped my investigation because I was too scared to unearth more resources doing more things on cloud that I don't know about. So instead, I figured let's set up a process for me to learn these things. But whatever trepidation, uncertainty, unclarity I might have about what's happening in cloud, I can only imagine the blurry vision that Bob must have across 2,000 employees. So there needs to be a way to reduce all of that to some meaningful form and structure. And that meaningful form and structure came from this mythical Bob deck that he made after the sale of his last company, which I've then promptly converted into a little graphical representation for our cloud efforts. And you're looking at that graphical representation now. It's just 3 lines. Some of you may have seen me walking around with a large notebook with a Tango sticker on it. And in it, I've written this model. It reminds me of a crazy person being locked up in an insane asylum, drawing on the wall this motif of 3 arrows has made an appearance over and over again in my notebook. And it's because it applies to so many different things. So let's run through some of those things. So first, visually, it kind of reminds me of the British flag. Once you see it, you'll never be able to unsee it. Pure coincidence, but I thought that was kind of interesting. The way we can abstract this and the way we can look at it, for example, from the perspective of the view of the Marlins or some other private equity firm that's looking at Tango down the road for acquisition. And this is, of course, the case whenever one company acquires another company. You pull up an Excel spreadsheet and you look at the numbers that make a difference. And those numbers are roughly these. What's the cash flow? increase sales is just another word for cash flow. Decrease cost is just another word for expense management. And of course, brand is the brand. Bit intangible, which is why I made it white. So that middle line is a bit of an intangible line, because if you ask 10 people, what is a brand? Give me the definition. They'll give you 10 different definitions. And then if you ask them about a specific brand of a specific company, each person will give you their own take on that brand. So it's an intangible thing. I remember an infographic from 2014 that showed most loved and most hated companies in the world. And Apple was number one on both lists. So the brand is clearly something that's rather intangible. Expenses, on the other hand, which we're always trying to decrease, we want to lower them, are quite tangible. And of course, cash flow is what the companies are buying when they buy another company, roughly speaking. But that's, of course, not the only way to look at it. Another way to look at it, and the way that, for example, CEOs who are managing these newly acquired companies are looking at it, is, well, what do we want to do, right? We certainly want to decrease carbon footprint. That's a nice way of saying fire people. We are the carbon. And if you think about that, it makes perfect sense. I mean, obviously nobody likes it. Nobody likes being fired. And firing people is not a walk in the park either. But looking at it from a strict spreadsheet point of view, lowering our carbon footprint makes a lot of sense. If you think about it in a strictly clinical way, and we remove sort of judgment from the process, firing a bunch of people in order to reduce the monthly cost of running a business makes perfect sense. I mean, nobody likes it. I get angry feeling in my stomach when I watch a movie where a sleazy businessman comes in and fires a bunch of people, and is painted to be a fat cat with a cigar and up to no good or something like that, right? But if we remove this Hollywood judgment from the process and we look at it in strictly clinical terms, firing people makes perfect sense. Let's do some math. What's the average cost of an employee? Where there's their salary, depending on who that employee is, etc. I don't know. It can be what, 50, 100K, 150, who knows? I don't know. Doesn't matter. Pick a number, right? Well, now you need to double that number, because to have an employee has additional costs. And it's not just keeping the lights on and computer equipment and etc. It's also health insurance, which is huge. That's in some cases as much as a person's salary, right? And costs abound. So for every person you fire, you double the amount of money you've saved, right? So multiply that by 10 or 100 or 1,000 people, and all of a sudden your spreadsheet looks tight, right? And then another funny thing happens to the rest of the company. People shape up. People get scared. They're going to be next. And they shape up. So whenever companies have done this, they've become greatly rewarded, and that's why it keeps happening. But lowering the carbon footprint, which is a nice way of saying that, saying firing people, is tremendously effective. And we shouldn't be surprised when companies. Conversely, we should increase reliance on bits, because bits, once made, the cost of maintaining those bits is negligible because the production is over. Maybe there's maintenance costs. There definitely is, but it's a lot less. Software will eat the world. And it's being done one bit at a time, and we want to be part of that. And then if I have my druthers, the culture that I would like to see emerge at Tango, the brand of Tango I would like to see emerge, is that of a business innovator. Not necessarily a technology innovator, although in cloud we're using numerous cutting edge technologies. And we have Ron and his R&D team to thank for that. But we can't rightfully call ourselves a technology innovator, I don't think. I would like to, but I don't think we can. I mean, we could. It's just, does it, match up with reality? Which is bendy. So, I suppose we could. But I think we're true innovators with papers and everything when it comes to business model and business innovation. We know how to manage expenses, and so that is our bread and butter. But the reality is that every single corporation produces inefficiencies first. It's always inefficiencies first. And then whatever product they produce, they also might produce that. But it's always inefficiencies. So this is one way to sort of trim it. And not inefficiencies because people are lazy. Inefficiencies due to lack of clarity is really what the most insidious inefficiencies are. And I posit a guess that that's usually due to lack of communication, although it could be too much communication. It's hard to know. It's hard to, case by case basis, let's say. Anyways, we want to increase our reliance on bits. That's another way to view it. So whether that's automation or more code or more product, more software solutions, that would be a good thing. From a product perspective, fixed has been our bread and butter. It's the best thing that happened to us. It's what keeps us alive. It's what keeps us going. But we could make an assumption that telecom, in terms of growth, well, it's not poised for growth. The arguments to be made to the contrary as well, and I hope some of them turn out to be true. But if you're a private equity firm looking at Tango for an acquisition possibility, let's say, you're looking at telecom as a declining part of the business. Mobile, this is sort of me being lazy. That really should be a blue line, because mobile for us is very tangible and very good, and those guys are kicking ass and taking names. and mobile is in a steady growth state, and we are doing well in that space. What bankers get excited about is cloud. Cloud to them holds the promise of future returns. And if we can make cloud go up, and we have the resources and the goodwill of the people to do that. Making cloud go up will make Tango incredibly attractive and is going to put us in a position of negotiating strength. And that's where all of us want to be. Okay, so here's the numbers from, let's say, reliable sources, Gartner, etc. 35% of cloud spent is essentially overages, right? The people are overpaying, and over the next couple of years, that's set to increase to like 50+%. Okay, listen to me. Gartner has no clue what's going on. These numbers are extremely low. If I know people and companies, like I think I know people and companies, and if you've been a person for a while, these numbers are not adjusted for inflation. Time is speeding up. And a lot of these statistical charts are not taking that into account. More information is being squeezed into lesser units of time. And this has profound effect on the numbers that are exponential in nature. And human brain is notoriously ill-equipped to handle exponential numbers. And so the cloud opportunity, however big we might imagine it might be at this present tense, is probably a fraction of reality. And so that's certainly something to contend with. Another way to think about it is to reduce friction in things we do, increase lubrication, smooth things out. And the attraction, of course, is a bit intangible, but desired and desirable. In our marketing, for example, I would like to attract. I would like us to be someone that other corporations and peoples want to get close to. And we want to think about how to do that. And there's various plans along those lines already in play. Yet another way to think about it, in some industries, with some people, they call it TCO, total cost of ownership. You know, that's just decreased cost by another name, decreased friction by another name. Profit, it's from an accountant's point of view, profit and cash flow and EBITDA and margins, etc. You know, these things are distinctly different, but profit, cash flow, increased lubrication, these are all in the same category of things that we want to go up. And sort of intangible in this one, perhaps, is that sweat equity that we put in. There are a billion things we could be spending our time on. There are a billion jobs out there. You could get any one of them. Why the one that you're doing right now? What are you sweating on? It better be good, better be fun for you, you know, in your own judgment. Ideally, right? That's what we would want. We want to increase the pipeline. We want to implement and then fine-tune the process of innovation. And of course, we want to chip away at the roadmap. So this Bob's framework is just so versatile and so just really useful in keeping your eye on the prize, as they say. And I'm just a huge fan. It's I have a big whiteboard in my office, and it's this framework that's written on it. And this is my target, so to speak.